we are projecting deficits for the next 10 years of a minimum of $2.2 trillion. And I would argue that is a rosy scenario. And particularly when you take a look at what they've done with the One Big Beautiful Bill, they're not seriously reducing spending to what I've been calling for as a pre-pandemic level. Again, at the danger of spouting out too many numbers here, I just want to put this in perspective. President Obama, over the course of his 8 years, his average deficit was $910 billion. Over the last, and I want to quick do this so I'm accurate, over the last 4 years of his administration is about $550 billion. Okay, so $500 billion deficit over his last 4 years. President Trump came into office in his first 3 years. The average deficit was about $800 billion. So he bumped up Obama's 4-year average from 550 to 800. Then COVID hit, and we had a deficit of $3.1 trillion just that 1 year. Now, what we should have done in 2021, when Biden came into office, is we should have returned to a reasonable pre-pandemic level. The pandemic was over. We didn't have to keep, we had unemployment spike up to, I think, 25 million people. Normal unemployment somewhere between 5 and 6. But within a few months, it was around 11 and then returned to pretty much normal early in 2021. We didn't have to keep stimulating the economy. But Biden did. Biden averaged $1.9 trillion per year in deficit. So Obama, when he left, his last 4 years, 550. Trump, before the pandemic, a little more than 800 billion per year. Biden, in his 4 years, went up to 1.9 trillion. And now CBO is projecting, and again, a rosy scenario, that we'll be averaging $2.2 trillion over the next 10 years. So we'll take our debt from $37 trillion up to $59 trillion. And if we extend the current tax law, take away $4 trillion in revenue, roughly, that add another $4 trillion. The spending cuts they're talking about, they're paltry. 1.5 trillion. Some of those are fake. Some of those are extended way out. They're offset by
out?
10 years.
10 years.
Yeah, I mean, we'll spend the money up front for the border, for defense. So that also takes away from that 1.5 trillion in spending. So at most, we're maybe cutting spending 1.2 trillion. Part of that, a few hundred billion, I think, is student loan forgiveness, which the Supreme Court will probably rule unconstitutional. We're not going to spend it anyway, but they count that as savings. So much of the savings they're talking about in the One Big Beautiful Bill is phony. It's fake. Or it's in the out years where if Republicans lose power, Democrats would just restore it. But no matter how you slice it, from my standpoint, CBO's $22 trillion of 10-year deficit is a rosy scenario. It'll probably be more than that. And what happens then is what's happening right now in the bond market. Interest rates are creeping up. You can't control that. If global creditors look at the United States as uncreditworthy, our 50-year average interest payment that we paid on our debt is over 5%. So I think it's as high as 5.8. It's not the most exact figure. But right now we're borrowing probably about 3.3%. That's been the average over the last 25 years, 3.3%. And that's kind of where we're at right now. If we increased that interest, if that interest expense increases to, or rate increases to 4.3%, add another $4 trillion in deficit spending. If it goes up to the 50-year average of 5.3, add about $8 or $9 trillion to the 22 trillion. So again, you go 22 trillion plus extending current tax law, add another close to 4 trillion. If interest rates start creeping up, and they are, just 1 percentage point, add another 4 trillion. So you can see very quickly you go from 22 to 26 to $30 trillion, add on to $37 trillion, we're up to $67 trillion in debt. I don't think we'd ever hit that. I think something's going to happen. We'll have a debt crisis. We'll have failure in our bond auctions, spiking interest rates even more. And again, we're spending more on interest this year than we spend on defense.
You often hear the phrase debt crisis. What does that mean exactly? What would that look like?
Depends whether it's a chronic or a acute crisis. I'd say we're already in a chronic debt crisis. That is what I would consider the devaluation of the dollar. I laid out, and we talked about this, my pre-pandemic options going back to 98, 2014, 2019. So a dollar you held in 1998 is only worth 51 cents today.
Ouch.
A dollar you held
it's devalued that much just since 98?
It's been cut in half. When I ran in 2010, that dollar is worth about 68 cents. A dollar you held during Obama in 2014 is worth 74 cents. A dollar you held just in 2019 is only worth 80 cents. So again, that is the devaluation of the dollar. That's inflation.
This is why everything is so expensive now.
That's a silent tax.
It's how you spend $300 at dinner and you're like, I didn't even get drunk. Like, how did that happen? That's the effect.
Yeah, and that's why you had 40-year high inflation. So that I would consider the chronic debt crisis. It just continues. And it's the danger. We have not tamed inflation yet. We've tamed it, but we haven't conquered it. So I think that's always on the horizon, particularly if we continue deficit spend, particularly if the bond markets continue to react as they are, keep driving interest rates up higher, and you start increasing the amount of interest expense, crowding out other spending.
So how many people can you really trust? Well, if you think about it, probably not that many. Let's say you've got 20,000 Instagram followers. How many of them would show up at your house to help you if you had a crisis? Maybe about 8. That's a high number. The same is true on the internet. Who do you trust with your private information? That question has never been more relevant. Data brokers record every single detail of everything you do online. Then they sell your digital profile to scammers and invasive advertisers who make a living off of harassing you. If you're getting harassed, that's why. You probably are. ExpressVPN can end this cycle. ExpressVPN is a very simple and cool product. The tech is sophisticated, the interface is easy. They have a US ExpressVPN that's an app that hides your IP address and reroutes 100% of your online traffic through secure encrypted servers. That means no one can see it. No data hawks, internet providers, big tech conglomerates can see what you do online. It's fast, it's easy to use, it works on every device you've got, your laptop, tablet, phone, your television, your smart TV, anything that connects to the internet. You get an extra 4 months for free when you use our link. Scan the QR code on the screen right now or go to expressvpn.com/Tucker. Get 4 extra months of ExpressVPN for free. That's expressvpn.com/Tucker.
So an acute debt crisis would be where you have a bond market failure. And like what happened to Greece, all of a sudden you can't sell your debt. So you either print the money, which sparks another round of 40, 50-year high inflation, devaluing the currency rapidly. We're not necessarily immune to hyperinflation. Other countries have experienced it.
So a failure to sell your debt in a bond auction, what does that look like? You just put out your bonds and nobody wants them?
Nobody buys them. And so, again, the advantage the U.S. has over any other country is we are the world's reserve currency.
Right. So
we can print dollars. So we can get by that moment, except for you're printing dollars, and inflation's pretty easy to define. It's too many dollars chasing too few goods. So you just print all those dollars, and again, the dollar devalues. The cost of your debt is lowered. Again, it's a silent way of addressing these massive deficits.
How far away from a moment like that are we?
I don't know. I would have thought we would have experienced it by now, but we've experienced it instead as again 40-year high inflation, the devaluation of the currency. I mean, I think that's pretty shocking when you take a look at that. As a dollar, just 11 years ago, is only worth 74 cents. 6 years, it's only worth 80 cents. That's an amazing level of devaluation.
Yes.
Now, it's not even close to hyperinflation where, you've got inflation rates of, hundreds of percent. But
so when that crisis comes, what do you do?
Well, you have a great deal of turmoil in your society. It won't be pleasant. It's what we need to try and avoid. And by the way, why I'm not in a full-blown panic, people like Art Laffer,
Yes.
economist of the Laffer curve, he does correctly point out America has enormous wealth. I mean, hundreds of trillions of dollars worth of wealth. So $37 trillion in relationship to hundreds of trillion dollars worth of wealth, that's manageable. It's just like if you're a billionaire but you don't work, you can have some pretty large mortgages on homes, but you still have to generate some income to service the debt. And I think that's kind of the point we're making. I mean, it's not irrelevant debt to GDP ratio. And we do have massive wealth, but we need to manage the cash flow problem here too, as well as, just the pernicious impact of all these transfer payments, providing encouragement for people not to work. There's a great article written, I think, in 2017 by Nick Eberstadt of the American Enterprise Institute, Our Miserable 21st Century, talking about how 20% of working age men are permanently out of the workforce.
Yes.
On Medicaid, using the Medicaid card to buy opiate drugs to, help finance their living. All those pernicious impacts of a society where we literally don't require people to work. We actually incentivize them not to. That's to my mind, that's one of the biggest problems we have with the big
mass
welfare
immigration to fill the gap.
Yeah, somebody's got to do the work.
Right.
And, we were talking earlier when I first entered this political realm, going to dairy breakfast, the first issue I heard in Wisconsin was, we don't have enough workers. Now, I come from a manufacturing background where for 20 or so years, you couldn't find enough people to work in a manufacturing plant, which is why I always kind of scratch my head. Listen, there are certainly products that we have offshored that we need to reshore, things that are strategic that impact our national security. But right now, I think our biggest problem is we don't have enough workers. If you bring all this manufacturing back to America, who's going to work the factories?
But
and we certainly shouldn't be bringing back high labor content product.
Right.
I think you need to diversify your supply base. You can't be so dependent on an adversary like China. Spread it around. That would reduce your risk.
So what you're saying, like the numbers you're describing are like the bottom line numbers. This is not like higher math. This should be obvious to everybody. What's the reaction been?
Well, they just ignore it. Again, one of the reasons I'm digging my heels in as the One Big Beautiful Bill comes over the Senate is we haven't had the discussion or the debate. The only number you heard about in the whole House debate here was $1.5 trillion, which sounds like a lot, right? $1.5 trillion in spending reduction. And of course, they're focusing on programs like Medicaid that the main problem with that is Obamacare, which is now called Medicaid expansion, allowing states to game the system, putting at risk Medicaid for the truly vulnerable. But that's all you really heard about. You don't ever put that in context. $1.5 trillion compared to $89 trillion spending over the next 10 years, it's barely a rounding error. We haven't been talking about the massive annual deficits. We don't talk about the debt.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. We hope you'll subscribe to it. And by the way, you can hit the little bell on there and get notifications every time we produce a video. We hope you'll do that also.